Right, I think we are session 6B, Cities Race to Zero. We only have a small amount of time and a very big agenda, so we're going to get straight into it. And yeah, we'll get on our way. So welcome to session 6B, as I've said, Cities Race to Zero. I'm Cathy Oak from the Melbourne Centre for Cities and Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. And I'm joined by Darcy Pimblett, Program Development Manager, Cities Power Partnership. We're two members of the local government convener group for this Better Futures Forum with Alexi Lynch and Stephanie Zurch. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that the four of us actually join you from today, the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present. And we encourage you to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the location that you're joining us from in the chat function too. And we encourage you to continue to use that chat function throughout this session. We won't be using the Q&A function that we've been using in other sessions. We're just going to be using the chat function. So please just add your comments and queries, and those of us in this session are going to jump in and interact with you there.
Thanks, Cathy, and welcome everybody. So the purpose of this discussion panel is to demonstrate Australian-wide local government contributions towards the Paris Agreement and action for COP26. So in this session, we want to talk about how local governments will continue to step up, to do more, and to be bold in taking leading climate action. We hope that this session inspires local governments to accelerate the action and advocacy that they're taking, including by becoming signatories to the Cities Race to Zero and Better Futures Australia pledges. Now is obviously a critical time to take these steps, with COP26 for Australian local governments to demonstrate their commitment to meaningful action on climate change on the world stage.
Yeah, we want as many Australian cities as possible to be on that stage in Glasgow, remotely, obviously, showing how they are stepping up through initiatives that we've mentioned already. To start this session, we have a pre-recorded interview that Darcy and I had with two city leaders to discuss how and why cities are lifting their ambition and what Cities Race to Zero is all about. So we're going to show this pre-record now.
Please welcome Councillor Susan Aitkin, Leader of Glasgow City Council, and Andy Deacon, Acting Managing Director of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, or GCOM, for the Better Futures Forum. Councillor Aitkin, all eyes will be on the City of Glasgow in November as your city hosts global leaders for the COP26 Climate Conference. How important are cities in influencing those discussions, and what do you see as their key role?
Cities are absolutely central in addressing climate change, and they need to be absolutely central at COP26. I think the Paris COP, which obviously resulted in the Paris Agreement, recognised properly for the first time how crucial cities and municipalities are, not just because cities are obviously where most of the people are, and therefore they're where most of the carbon emissions are generated, but also where the greatest gains can be made most quickly in reducing emissions. So by front-loading interventions and investments into cities over the next decade, that will be where the biggest amount of progress can be made towards national and international targets in terms of emissions reduction and limiting the increase in the planet's temperature. But also cities can deliver. I've been seeing in all of my conversations since Glasgow became host city for COP26, nation states pledge, but cities deliver. Cities have the flexibility, the ability to move. We know our places. And COP26 has to be the COP of action. It has to go beyond pledges and targets, and cities and municipalities are best placed often to deliver the action that will actually make the difference on the ground and make the progress that we need on climate action. So national governments have to facilitate the ability of cities to do that, whether that's devolving power or fiscal levers to cities or devolving resource to cities, they need to recognise that we can go faster and deliver at the pace and scale that we need to if cities are in the lead.
And with all of that in mind, as the host city, what is the City of Glasgow doing to step up ambition in the lead up to COP26 and indeed during the conference?
Well, we are very keen to use the unrivaled platform that we have of being probably the world's most talked about city right now, and certainly by November, to accelerate the delivery on our climate ambitions. Glasgow's already committed to be a net zero city by 2030, which for a post-industrial city with some quite substantial physical and built environment challenges as Glasgow has, that is ambitious. We believe it's deliverable, but we also believe it's essential. We believe that Scotland and indeed the UK won't reach their national targets and ambitions unless, as I said, it's cities like Glasgow that are leading the way and that are in the vanguard of this delivery. So we're working right now we've put together our green investment portfolio and our net zero action plan, which work together. We think that it will take about £30 billion sterling worth of investment in Glasgow over the next decade to deliver this. Again, we think the money's out there to do that. It needs the commitment and the will of not just national governments, but international financial institutions to make sure that the money's there for cities like Glasgow to deliver. It's actually no more expensive to do this than it has been to respond to COVID. It's the right thing to do. We need to make this investment, just as governments internationally made the investment to respond to COVID. They need to do it with the climate emergency, actually treat it like an emergency, and make that investment and make it at pace and at scale. So we've identified a whole number of interventions and have already started work on those, from retrofitting 450,000 homes across our metropolitan region to make them more energy efficient. We're looking at heat networks to shift from what is largely gas heating in most of our homes to renewable sources, using our river, the River Clyde. We think can power probably about 50% of homes in the city. The others will look at things like a combination of hydrogen and ground source and air source heat. For example, we're decarbonising transport. We've got plans to build a metro for the city, which is long overdue. But with all of these investments, investment in green infrastructure, our Clyde Climate Forest, which is going to plant 18 million trees over the next decade, all of these kinds of investments, we also want to make sure that every single pound that we spend delivers multiple benefits for citizens. So it's not just climate action on its own, it's climate action also addressing long-standing and deep-seated social and economic inequalities in the city, but also ensuring that just transition, that we're also creating jobs and opportunities and pathways for citizens to benefit on a whole number of fronts from this really historic and unprecedented level of investment that not just Glasgow, but cities and municipalities around the world are going to be making over the next decade. This has got to be transformational, not just for the way that we treat the planet, but the way that we treat people as well, and the way that our economy is organised in order to ensure that we have the well-being of people and planet at its centre. And that's something we've learned from this pandemic as well.
Fantastic. It's great to hear you say that you're using this platform that you've been given to emphasise the great work that you're doing and how you're going to go further, but also to call on other governments to, support local government in delivering that action. In Paris in 2015, we had a really powerful image of hundreds of mayors standing on the steps of Paris City Hall. Considering the limits on travel due to COVID-19 at the moment, what do you hope to see as the Glasgow moment for this conference?
Well, I think we can do something similar. It might be a hybrid. It might be some mayors there in person and some on a screen like this. But certainly our city chambers, as we call it in Glasgow, which is a historic Victorian building, very spectacular actually. We will make that essentially the world's city hall for the period of COP. That will be the space that we open to my fellow city and local government leaders from around the world. So whoever is there, whoever is able to attend in person in Glasgow, we want them to be there. We want them to be making the voice of local government heard really, really loud and clear at these negotiations. The LGMA, the Local Government and Municipal Association, which is one of the parties at the Conference of the Parties, they need to have our collective voices behind them, making sure that while we might not be in the room necessarily in terms of the negotiations, we need to be influencing, and world leaders need to be hearing the messages that are coming from cities, because in almost every case across the world, cities are being more ambitious. Our targets are more ambitious. Our plans are already more advanced on delivery. So world leaders, nation state leaders, CEOs, they need to learn from us, from local leaders on what we're doing, and both enable us and facilitate us and frankly copy us, pick up on what we're doing, do better themselves.
It's also inspiring, and hopefully we can get behind you from Australia. We might not be able to be there in person, but we know that Australian cities are certainly ramping up their ambition, and that's what this session is all about. And so we, one of the initiatives is Cities Race to Zero, and we're talking about Race to Zero as part of the Better Futures Forum this week. So Andy Deacon from the Global Covenant of Mayors, let us know, what is this Cities Race to Zero and the role of networks like GCOM in this initiative?
Good day, everyone. My name's Andy Deacon. I'm the Acting Managing Director of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. We're the largest global alliance for city leadership. The Race to Zero is a global campaign, next slide please, to rally leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, and investors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that prevents future threats, creates jobs, and unlocks inclusive, sustainable growth. So the Race to Zero campaign is intended to build momentum around a shift to a decarbonised economy ahead of COP26, where we very much hope that national governments, as well as local leaders, will strengthen their commitments to the Paris Agreement. So cities, businesses and other entities that have signed on to the Race to Zero are declaring their support for those important goals of the Paris Agreement, and recognising the need to accelerate a green and just recovery for a more inclusive and resilient global economy. The Cities Race to Zero is the track for cities only, where cities are uniting to demonstrate their support for inclusive climate action in line with those goals of the Paris Agreement. And there's a large network of global city partners. So C40 cities, ICLE, ourselves, the Global Covenant of Mayors, CDP, UCLG, WRI and WWF. And we're all coming together with the ambition to recruit 1,000 cities to the Race to Zero in advance of COP26. And the collaboration of partners across that network will really ensure that cities are aligned on the science-based targets that are required to achieve a net zero future, and will provide support to those cities that are signing on to the campaign. And the partnership also ensures that the Cities Race to Zero commitment is consistent with existing reporting, and won't place additional burdens on cities who are interested in joining. It's important to say, though, that cities signing on to the Race to Zero must commit to pledge to reach net zero in the 2040s or by 2050 at the latest. They must set an interim target and achieve that in the next decade, and that should reflect a fair share of 50% global reduction in CO2 by 2030. So they're intermediate targets on the way towards net zero. And there is a requirement to report annually against those commitments. But importantly, there's a lot more information that interested cities can find at citiesracetozero.org.
Nicely summarised, Andy. And we saw, only a few Australian cities are on that list, but we know from networks like the Cities Power Partnership that Darcy's from, that there are hundreds of cities in Australia, and many of the members of the networks that are part of this initiative too, like Italy and C40. There are many cities in Australia doing a lot, and this session that you're in at the moment is about how do we go up that next level and reach the lofty goals and quite right ambition of the Cities Race to Zero pledge. So we'll be having a conversation about that in the second half of this session. But, Andy, following on from what Councillor Aitkin spoke about, why is it so important for local government that often works maybe by themselves, to join up and advocate on climate action in particular at this moment in time, in the lead up to COP26?
Thanks, and thank you to Councillor Aitkin for the important words about the role of local government, and indeed the whole constituency of what gets termed non-state actors, or the LGMA, local government constituency, which does play an important role in the climate negotiations, although it's national governments that are doing the negotiating, demonstrating that ambition from all sectors of society, including local government, will be an important building block to give national governments the kind of both the comfort and the push that's much needed to drive that level of ambition. And we really are seeing the impacts of the climate crisis on a day-to-day basis now. I'm based in Brussels, in Belgium, and even in the last few days, tragic loss of life in this country as a result of very heavy flooding. And it really is now a time for local, regional and national government to mobilise at unprecedented pace to deliver on emissions reduction targets, as well as addressing resilience building and adaptation to climate change. And both GCOM and Cities Race to Zero will help cities mobilise with that pace and scale. So all of the networks involved, and we ourselves, are providing data, decision support tools, technical assistance and capacity building, and importantly, opening up routes to financing and access to the funding and finance needed really to deliver projects on the ground. But it's not by kind of acting alone that will achieve what needs to be done, or indeed to deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement. And part of our work is about demonstrating the power of collective action and the role of networks in both driving overall ambition, in sharing best practice and experience, in fostering and providing the support that's needed, to make sure that every local government feels that they have a role to play, and that there are concrete steps that they can take on the path towards net zero and to build resilience. And it's important to say that without local government on board, then climate targets really will remain well out of reach.
Thanks, Andy. It's really great to hear both of you spell out just how important it is for local governments, not only to take and step up their own action, but to have a leading role in influencing the decisions that are made on the national and international stages. So we don't have a lot of time, so we need to conclude, unfortunately. But before we do wrap up this introductory session, I'd just like to ask each of you whether you have a final for Australian local governments who might be considering joining Cities Race to Zero. And Councillor Aitkin, I'll start with you first.
And do it, because the benefits that will come are far, far outweigh the challenges. This is the pivotal moment for cities. Everything that you want to achieve for your people, for your places, for your citizens, you can do it through this route, or a great deal of what you want to achieve. We're going to be investing unprecedented amounts of money in the coming years. You need to be in that early. You need to have your plans. You need to have understand what your interventions are going to be, and be part of that. And the kind of support network that Andy talked about it will help you do that. You won't be alone. You'll be joined by hundreds and hopefully soon thousands of cities around the world. So get on board.
Brilliant. And you, Andy?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Aitkin, for that. Very much echo that, but would also add that for Australian cities and many others around the world, signing on to Cities Race to Zero will send a powerful signal to national government that cities are ready and willing to partner to drive higher levels of ambition. And as we've heard, cities are leading the way on climate action and green recovery. But in order to go further, faster, then we need them to be working in partnership with national government. And the Cities Race to Zero pledge, as I'd emphasise, is in line with existing GCOM commitments. So we'd encourage all GCOM signatory cities across the Oceania region and in Australia to sign on to Race to Zero in advance of COP26 in November, just to send that really powerful signal and to make a very powerful and clear and loud signal and statement that local government is ready to partner with national government and others in the delivery of the Paris Agreement.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, both of you. We're going to now, through the power of technology, beam into the future and join our Australian cities in the live session at Better Futures Forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Bye.
And here we are, I think, back in the future. Yes, we are. Well, I hope you found that video as inspiring as we did to actually do the interview. I think Councillor Aitkin put it really nicely there when she said that nation states make pledges, but cities deliver on achieving climate goals. And that's why the actions of local governments are so critical to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, and why today we wanted to bring together leading councils from Australia to hear about the actions that they're taking to deliver bold, meaningful action on climate change.
Indeed. So I think that you can see them on the screen. We're lucky to be joined by a fantastic panel. Please welcome Councillor Rohan Leppert, City of Melbourne, Councillor Jess Scully, City of Sydney, Councillor Trent McCarthy from Darebin City Council, representing VECO, or the Victorian Energy Collaboration, and Michelle English, Associate Director, Public Policy, Parklands and Sustainability from the City of Adelaide.
Thank you all for joining us. Each of your cities are leading the charge to net zero, and given the Better Futures Forum is about stepping up action in line with our global counterparts, we want to hear from each of you about the actions that your cities are taking next. So the first question is for Councillor Leppert, Councillor Scully and Michelle. Which of your city's projects would you present as the next big initiative to tackle climate change if you were joining Councillor Aitkin there in Glasgow on the city's Race to Zero stage? And Councillor Leppert, will go to you first, followed by Councillor Scully and Michelle.
Thanks, Darcy, and hi everyone from Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country in City of Melbourne. So in 2017, City of Melbourne was the first capital city council in Australia to be powered by 100% renewable energy. I think our Melbourne Renewable Energy Project, bulk purchasing project, where we've built a new wind farm near Ararat, is reasonably well known now. But looking forward, we need to figure out how to get renewable energy into a whole lot of smaller commercial users and residents as well. So we're looking at batteries as our next big thing. Power Melbourne is an initiative that we announced recently. This is a new term of council, and we've embedded tackling the climate emergency right into our 4-year council plan. So over that 4-year horizon, we are going to roll out Power Melbourne. We're at the start of that process, of course, and we're looking to partner with a range of private industry providers and a whole lot of others to look at starting with a business case, but rolling up a pilot battery network over the next few years to bring forward a potential future capacity of 5 megawatts by 2024 and unlock a whole lot of other benefits that come along with that. So training and jobs in the green tech sector, building our reputation as a centre for clean energy innovation, and all that open data so that every resident of the City of Melbourne can see how they individually are contributing to a clean, green future. Power Melbourne is going to be our next flagship project.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Leppert. I'm very excited to see how Power Melbourne goes. Councillor Scully, let's go to you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Tuning in from Gadigal land here in Sydney. I'm very, very excited to be here with other city makers who are leading the race to zero, and it is a race. And I'm very, there's so much to learn from and build on, and I want to acknowledge Melbourne for their extraordinary work on their power purchase agreement. And we are really excited at the city that we are now powered by 100% renewables. We have invested in community renewables projects in regional New South Wales, and that has been a really significant move for us. And it has been the #1 game changer in terms of moving us towards our emissions targets. We are now down at 76% of our 2006 levels of emissions because, to a large extent, because of that one big move. And so what we're trying to do now is to make sure everyone else in our LGA can also access that. But we're taking a slightly different path to the City of Melbourne. The first thing that we're doing is that we're working with Resilient Sydney, which is a network of local governments, the 31 local governments that make up the metropolitan Sydney area, to advocate for retailers to provide that location data on green power, renewable power uptake from our residents, and so that we can try to facilitate and enable power purchase agreements from our community. And some of our most significant moves include the Better Building Partnership, so working with commercial office managers to improve their performance, and that's had an enormous impact. A 61% reduction in emissions from commercial office space and 39% reduction in water use from 2006. But we've also been working on the built environment in a different way to establish net zero performance standards for new buildings, those big multi-unit residential and big commercial buildings, to try and get the built environment sector to perform better. But there are probably 2 quick projects that I'd give a shout out to. That while the renewable move has been the most impactful in terms of reducing our emissions, there are 2 that are really important around collaboration. One is a really exciting project that we're doing with 11 local government areas, which is called Paving the Way. Because to get down the last little bit of our emissions, we're going to need to reduce emissions from waste really substantially. And there's a project which is called Paving the Way, which is about taking, we produce about 5,500 tonnes of waste every day in our LGA. 69% of that's recycled, but we can still divert 2,000 tonnes from landfill. And this is a project that actually takes glass collected from recycling bins and turns it into refined crushed glass to be used instead of virgin sand in building roads and footpaths, which has a really positive impact. And then the final project I'll give a shout out to is a culturally innovative project. While we still need to offset the emissions that we still do produce, we are buying those credits from the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, who are an extraordinary Aboriginal-led organisation that are all about both providing a channel for traditional owners to get funding to do carbon abatement projects using traditional practices, as well as accrediting them through traditional practices and in ways that are culturally appropriate as well. So that's a really great project. I'd love, if we could take to Glasgow, I'd take it to Glasgow. Thank you.
It's amazing to hear what you can achieve through working with your own council emissions, but also with your community. Michelle English, let's go to you.
Thank you, Darcy. I'm coming here from Ghana country, so Ghana country of the Adelaide Plains, and it's a really live question for us in Adelaide at the moment because we are currently reaching the end of implementation of our first carbon neutral Adelaide action plan that was launched back in 2016. And like the other cities, we actually have achieved quite a lot already through that time, putting in electric vehicle charging stations for our community, providing incentives for uptake of sustainable technologies. But where we are at is that while our greenhouse gas emissions have decreased by 21% since 2007, and this has mainly been due to a reduction of about 51% in stationary energy emissions. But it hasn't offset that whole amount because we've been seeing this rise in transport emissions, which have increased by 37%, and waste emissions have been growing and now make up 9% of our total emissions. So with this in mind, this year we've been reviewing that progress to date, and we're looking at setting science-based targets and investigating a number of our next step projects that are really suited to our unique position of having a really high level of renewable electricity in our grid in South Australia. So we've just started implementing our new resource recovery strategy, and the benefit of in South Australia having organics being commercially composted for many, many years, but we can do much better. So a key theme is zero food waste, and we're ramping up our efforts in increasing organics recycling in multi-unit dwellings, in our own facilities and in public spaces. Other key initiatives that we're looking at is how we can encourage and support the shift to all electric buildings to take advantage of that high penetration of renewable electricity in the grid. So very similar types of issues that Sydney and Melbourne have. And importantly, we're focusing and continuing to focus on accelerating the shift to electric vehicles with smart charging EV technology trials and offering incentives for bidirectional EV charging infrastructure. We're continuing to focus on assisting these new innovation by providing rebates for cutting edge technologies such as advanced solar sharing that will assist with grid stability, and underpinning it all will be ramping up our peer-to-peer learning and collaboration with organisations within the city. So that's what we would take. Too much to do and a lot to be focusing on.
Thank you, Michelle, and congratulations on the approach that you're taking to tackling all of that. Councillor McCarthy, let's go to you next. You're here representing the incredible Victorian Energy Collaboration Project, or VECO as it's called. I assume if you were standing up there on the stage in Glasgow with Councillor Aitkin, you'd be speaking about the importance of collaboration in tackling the big problems of climate change.
Thanks, Darcy, and a big acknowledgement from me as well to the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, and to acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. Yeah, look, for me, it all comes down to collaboration, and I think that's something which you've heard from all of us. VECO, the Victorian Energy Collaboration, I still have to remind myself to call it that, because for a long time we called it the Local Government Power Purchase Agreement, and I feel that this is, for me, is probably one of the most significant things that local government can do, is to move together, to move at speed, move at scale, but also to make sure that every council that can be involved is involved. And for us, VECO is actually a project that we commenced in 2017. It was just about, just less than a year after we declared a climate emergency. Darebin was the first place in the world to do that. And when we made that declaration, we said, if we're going to actually move to zero for our council emissions, how do we actually support other councils to do the same thing, particularly those that might not be able to move in that way? And so the first thing we thought of is, how do we move all of our operations to renewables? How do we move at scale? And how do we help those small councils around Victoria that won't be able to do that work on their own, may not have the personnel, and certainly won't have the buying power? So we built the largest buying power group. It's now the largest emissions reduction project of local government in Australia. 46 councils came together, and it takes a lot of work to get 46 councils to actually do anything together. And we think that there are about 1,000 people involved in making decisions to make this work. But it's meant that effectively it's the same as taking 90,000 cars off the road, or about 45,000 houses off fossil fuels. 260,000 tonnes of CO2 literally will be avoided, because we have pulled our purchasing power over a 10-year period, have switched that to 2 wind farms, one of which is already operational, and the next one comes online next year. And it means that for every one of those councils, they get that little bit closer for their operations to become 100% renewable, and also reducing their emissions. But it also demonstrates to the broader community that we can do this. We can actually do this. If we collaborate at scale, we can make that transition. Now, for me, this is actually one of the other wonderful stories, is that every one of these councils is likely to save money on their energy bills. What a great story for us to be telling back to our communities. That's more money for libraries, it's more money for bike paths, and all those wonderful other projects that the other speakers have mentioned. So collaboration is key. Thinking about the many rather than the few, and understanding that the solution for one place is probably the solution for a lot of other places. And one of the things that really excited me from hearing from some of our smaller councils in Victoria is that this was something they wanted to do, but it wasn't until we invited them into the space that it was possible. So I think for anyone that's out there today thinking about this is too big for us, it's not too big for you if you work together. And I think that, for me, that's the biggest message as we race to zero. We've got a target of 2030, and that's because we need to push ourselves as hard as we can for our whole municipality, but we want to bring every council with us.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, it's such a key message of this Better Futures Forum about finding opportunities to work together. That is the only way to that we're going to get there. But more importantly, it's about driving greater ambition amongst all levels of government and partnerships in our communities. So, and I think all of you have mentioned this key message of learning from each other to further drive this climate action. So to close this session, and we're rapidly running out of time, which is annoying, but you know, we want to know how you, as leading governments, and we're very conscious that we have got 3 capital city councils here today and a collective of, you know, powerhouse of climate champions through VECO here today. We just want to, you know, understand from the 4 of you, you know, what are you going to do to continue to not only lead, but more importantly, to bring other cities and towns along with you to reach ambitious net zero goals together. So we'll start with Councillor, we'll go in the same order. We'll start with Councillor Scully, then to Councillor Leppert, Michelle and Trent. Just feel free to start speaking after each other. So Councillor Scully, how are you going to bring everyone else along on your ambitious journey?
I think, you know, as everyone's saying in the chat, it's all about those networks. And, you know, for us, Resilient Sydney is a really important way in. And the ROCs, you know, the regional organisations of council are becoming, you know, really useful ways of buying, selling and creating markets at scale where those markets you know, aren't delivering sustainable outcomes. And so I think that but Resilient Sydney, if we could take the same sort of, you know, collective approach and sense of urgency, you know, as Councillor Aitkin said, to dealing with this emergency, the pandemic, you know, as to dealing with climate, realising we have a very short time to act, then I think we could achieve a really powerful outcome. But I think it's those networks like Resilient Sydney and really building on the ideas that we're spreading or learning in forums like this one, and then trying to communicate them to as many groups as possible. But what we tend to do as well at the city is that we try to use the resources that we have to do strategic and foundational work. So I also want to give a big shout out to our net zero buildings work, because that is designed to be implemented city or statewide, so that every shopping centre that gets built from now on gets built to those standards. And that's the sort of approach I think that capital cities can hopefully do to contribute and be, you know, a good part of the local government ecosystem.
I completely agree with that, and we have a lot to learn from Sydney as well, and there's a lot of collaboration between the 2 biggest cities, the central cities in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, on reducing emissions in that commercial building stock. Commercial buildings in the City of Melbourne are responsible for about 60% of emissions in the municipality, and that really is where we need to keep tackling. Sydney's reductions in that space are still outstripping Melbourne, so we've got a lot to learn there. But to pick up on the thread of the other things that have been said today, the VECO has learnt from MREP, and MREP 2 is learning from VECO. So Melbourne Renewable Energy Project had 4 councils involved and some universities, some other institutions, some zoos, Australia Post. But of course, Darebin's really doing some heavy lifting here across the local government sector with 46 councils. But while we roll out the second Melbourne Renewable Energy Project with collective purchasing for renewable energy, we keep looking at what's been learned from VECO as well. So there's no secrets about how these agreements have been put together. We are sharing as much of the successes and challenges as we can across the sector, because it's a public good we're talking about here. So we want exactly the same approach when we talk about Power Melbourne. We want a replicable model that other councils can look to. And of course, some councils around the world, some cities around the world have looked at these community scale batteries already, and we are gleaning as much information as we possibly can. It's all about replicable models for us, and so sharing is the name of the game.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say that peer-to-peer learning is incredibly important, because worldwide local government is facing the same challenges, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we are part of a group with our Capital City Council of Lord Mayors, and there's a climate action working group. So all capital cities, not just the ones represented here in Australia, are working together on climate action. Adelaide and Sydney and Melbourne, we're all also part of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, where 20 international cities that have made deep decarbonisation commitments are working together. And in all of these forums, we share our challenges and our learnings between sustainability professionals, but we also encourage each other and celebrate successes along the way. But in addition to these sort of more formal arrangements, certainly Adelaide, we have definitely learnt from other cities, and we, City of Darebin's here. Going back, many years, they had the Solar Saver program, and we took those learnings and we adapted them for our own situation. The Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance took what Melbourne was doing and actually helped share those learnings with other cities. And now Sydney, Melbourne, Newcastle, so many other cities have undertaken PPAs as well. So it is incredibly important. In addition to that, we've got informal networks like our Environmental Sustainability Network in South Australia, a really big, strong regional focus on adaptation as well. And, participating in forums like this is just part of that role. And I would say that the learnings that we have, it's not just sharing them with local government, because so much of what we're learning along the way, we can share with community and businesses. And in Adelaide, we do that through our Carbon Neutral Adelaide Partners program. And we support those, 200 partners to come together. We bring in topic specialists and we assist each other to play our part to take that ambitious climate change action that is so necessary.
The back of that and keep that collaboration story going. Christiana Figueres said that in order to tackle the climate emergency, we need to be relentlessly optimistic and radically collaborative. And I think what you're hearing from all of us, and I just speak back to Rohan's comment before, these power purchase agreements, these collaborations at scale, are learning from each other. And as we start to move from what local government's doing to get its own house in order, we're able to start to have that huge impact on other sectors. So one of the things that I can see, and I really hope this is part of the conversation over the next, well, not just the conversation, but the action over the next few years, is how we shift, just like Melbourne has done and just like Sydney's doing, bring more people and more organisations and sectors into the tent. But also there's the opportunity, and I think it's, we talk about the fact that this is a race. It's a race where we all win together. And I think that's the lovely thing. It's more like a relay in the sense that it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us to learn from each other. We're really good in local government, I think, about putting the egos aside because at the end of the day, we're there for our communities, but our communities are actually, and I think that's come up in the chat as well, our communities demand us to bring our best game to this. So for me, this is all about us continuing to lift the bar and to show to state and federal governments that this can be done, and it can be done through that relentless optimism and radical collaboration. So I just want to give a shout out finally to the council officers who actually are probably joining us from a lot of councils, because they're the ones that do the detailed work. And if we don't back in those experts and those technical people, we can't actually work out how to do the finer work. And I think that this is something where the community wins, the politicians actually can win, and they can actually take this on. But ultimately, it's actually about making that transition as quickly as we can. Cheers.
Well, there is so much to be excited about in there, and I love that take, that relentless optimism. That's a fantastic way to finish. I feel like we could talk about this all afternoon, but unfortunately we do need to wrap up. But I will just give a quick plug to City Networks. If you are inspired by that conversation, if you're part of a city that is not involved in a city network, whether that be GCOM, the Cities Power Partnership, or Cities Race to Zero, get involved. Before we wrap up, thank you so much to all of our guests who've joined us today, live and pre-recorded. We'll see you all on the virtual Race to Zero stage in Glasgow. Cathy and I would also love to see any of you who are interested in this afternoon's networking session at 3:30. So please do feel free to come along and continue this conversation then.
Yesterday we started a self-help group for LGAs wanting to learn from each other how we do continue to work for loftier goals. So come and join us as we intend to continue that conversation in the networking session. So yeah, thank you again to everyone that joined us. Please, you know, we put so many links in the chat. Copy and paste them and export them and send them off to your councils or your constituents and yeah, let's get on board and really encourage the Australian government to set proper targets given the amount of effort already happening at this level of government. We can do it, and we can actually do more. So, and get involved in Cities Race to Zero, and get in touch, as Darcy has said, with your relevant city network for more information. So in a moment, you'll be automatically moved, I believe, to the wrap-up session before we head to a break. So thank you so much. Thank you, Darcy. Thank you, Lex and Steph, our fabulous local government conveners. It's been an amazing thing to pull these sessions together with you all. So see you soon. Thank you.